clay gets marred sometimes in the potter's hand because the clay is resistant to what the potter is doing. It's not the potter's fault. Sometimes electricians find themselves working with wires and stuff that are faulty. It's not the electrician's fault. A plumber may find that a pipe is not bending and shaping a certain way that he or she wants it to shape. It's not the plumber's fault. It is the fact that these objects are resisting being shaped and molded. Pottery is not an easy job of shaping something into something beautiful. As you look sometimes, the potter's hands are not only dirty because life and the situations in life get a little dirty and a little messy sometimes. But sometimes, as you look at the potter's hands around that clay, they have been chafed and cracked, and sometimes they even bleed while working with the clay. Imagine God's hands on us, shaping us, molding us, and they're getting a little chafed. They're getting a little raw. And maybe even they bleed sometimes, like the blood that came from the cross. And Jeremiah learns lesson number 2 as he stands there watching this potter dealing with a marred piece of clay. Traditionally, the potter would throw the clay out. We live in a society where we throw things out when they're no longer useful. Cell phones, computers, dishes, and even sometimes people. And we may find people say, so what? No big deal. It's just a lump of clay. Throw it out. Start all over again. But you and I are that lump of clay. And God decides we are not throwaway people. I used to have a sign that I kept in my apartment. And the sign said, God doesn't make junk. And it had a little girl and a little boy. And when God created you and when God created me, God did not make junk. And so God determines not to throw us out, but to take the clay, that marred piece of clay, and reshape us, and remold us, and give us new beginnings and new hope. The clay may have been marred. And sometimes in our lives, we feel like we have been broken to the point, or marred and spoiled to the point that our lives are hopelessly lost in the marred and in the spoiledness of life. We find a clue to that in verse 12 of this passage, where it says, as they respond, as the people, a nation responds back to God, there it is no use, they say. We will continue with our own plans. Each of us will follow our stubborn ways in our hearts. That's raw hopelessness. Sometimes we get in those positions where we find ourselves feeling like we can't find our way out. There's no door that's opening up, allowing us to escape. But the good news in Jeremiah this morning, as we think about a flawed nation, a nation going awry, doing its own thing, putting God to the side and saying, forget you, God. We don't need you. As we think about that and our own flawedness, Jeremiah brings us good news. God not only doesn't throw us away, but God takes us, our brokenness, and begins to reshape us. A woman named Susie Bender tells this story about an imperfect bow. She says, long before I started thinking about bagging bows and everyday sacred, I was looking sticklingly for a handsome Chinese tea bowl that when I finally found it, it was broken into pieces. Imagine that the bowl that I saw broken into pieces. And yet, they didn't throw it out. What they had done was taken each of the small broken pieces, and they had put silver between each of the pieces and put the plate and the teapot back together again. It was imperfect, but yet it was perfect. It was more beautiful than what she could even imagine, with the silver streaming through the cracks. And yet it was made whole. That's what God does with us in our brokenness. He takes it and He puts us back together and reshapes us, reshapes our thinking, reshapes our worldview, reshapes our habits and our deeds, so that they reflect something unique and something beautiful. God indeed is the potter. God strengthens us in our brokenness in Jesus Christ. The flaws that we bring to Jesus and to God call us to turn around, to let go of the things that cause us to be marred, spoiled, broken. And Jeremiah lets us know there is hope for a flawed nation, a people who had committed to God but then wandered far away. I want to close with this story. When Michigan played Wisconsin in a basketball tournament early in the 1989, Michigan's Ronald Robinson stepped to the foul line to shoot some foul baskets. And Michigan was behind at the time by 1 point, and he had the opportunity to put them in the lead. And as he stepped to the foul line, he shot the first shot, and he missed the basket. He shot the second shot, and he missed the basket. He felt really bad about losing the game for his team. He was sorrowful, deeply sorrowful for what had happened. But he went back. He went back and he began every day throwing foul free throw from the free throw line baskets towards the basket. 100 times a day, each and every day, he kept throwing that ball, trying to make it a little bit better. And then they came finally to the season end, where the final tournament was going to determine who was the champion for that year. Once again, the decision was down to 3 seconds, and Romo was asked to come to the foul line. He stepped to the foul line, and he had 3 shots to make. Whoosh! Went the ball down into the basket. 1 more up, and they would be even. Whoosh! Went the ball down into the basket, and they were even. And he stood there and he contemplated. finally he shot the ball. And it began to move towards the basket. And down in the basket it went. It happened because he dared to change. He dared to be reshaped, remolded. And this time, that reshaping and that remolding made a difference in his life and in his shooting. In 2 Corinthians, we are told, godly sorry leads to repentance. John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, reminds us over and over again that turning, that repentance, which means to turn away from and to turn to, that turning away from maybe just our selfishness, maybe just our misdeeds, and that turning towards God makes a difference in our lives. That godly sorry, according to Jeremiah, causes God to say, with hope and a new vision, I relent destroying you and will give you another opportunity. God is our potter. Our nation is in God's hands. Our world is in God's hands. And our lives are in God's hands. God is shaping us and molding us, not to harm us, but to give us